Welcome back to another episode of Beer Time with Books. It is episode 30.
Pew, 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 pew.
We've been doing a lot of those recently.
Yeah, there's been a lot of air horns, but this one is warranted. Episode 30. That's pretty nuts, guys.
This
is huge.
Yeah, that's a
huge,
real
guys.
adult of a podcast.
I've never done 30 of anything.
Yeah, this is the unprecedented territory. But also, other little event going on right here. Happy birthday to the pod. We started at the end of November in 2018, and we recorded our last episode a little bit earlier into November, so we've passed the birthday, but we are officially 2 years old.
Wow.
Wow.
So while we are simultaneously an adult podcast, we're also a wee baby.
We're a toddler.
We're a toddler. 2 years, man. Wow. 2018.
2 years, man.
2 years. We're old and wise.
So yeah, just a couple milestones there. Feeling good about that. And excited because this is the last book episode of season 2. We are looking at the back half of Oryx and Crake.
Yeah.
I'm
pumped for the last episode. I have already nailed down my top 3. It's already been decided. Just so everyone knows.
I'm so stressed. I'm
Look
behind.
forward to the next episode.
Yeah, for everyone that's unfamiliar, the last episode of this season is a bit of a award show.
Yeah.
That also has a category of worst.
It's highly anticipated by multiple people.
All of our loyal listeners.
Yes.
Really look forward to it. I do not know what I'm going to say the worst book is, though. Is that surprising? I have my top 3. I don't know what the worst one is.
Yeah, you know, our worst one last year was Vineland, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Was mine?
So,
I think mine might not have been.
No, yours was Hitchhikers.
No, yours wasn't Vineland, but I don't know. I don't know that I have a contender, like a top contender for worst this year. Last year it was very clear to me, not because I think Vineland is a terrible book quality-wise, but because I really didn't enjoy it.
Well, we're going to post a 7-book picture for everybody to show all the books from the season on Instagram, Beer Time with Books. We'll also have the beers from this episode. And because apparently we haven't done it, we'll post another episode for any of you new listeners for the first 7, because this is now 14 books on the pod.
Not another episode, another picture.
Sorry, another picture. So that's all going to be going down on Instagram. And yeah, those will be some exciting times ahead. But in the meantime, we have a couple things to kick out before we get to our discussion on part 2 of Oryx and Crake. And the first matter of business is, what are you drinking? What are you drinking tonight? Who wants to start on this one?
I'll start.
Go for it.
This is Danny. I am currently drinking a Boulevard Nutcracker Winter Warmer. And I trekked 15 minutes one way in the cold.
It's a Kansas City tradition. You got to trek 15 minutes to get your Boulevard Nutcracker.
15 minutes. It's because I walked to the grocery store downtown to get my beer this evening. And I'm already on my second Nutcracker. So things are, this Friday evening is shaping up to be pretty good.
Yeah, we've been trying to wrangle a dog who's still right around a couple mics. So if you hear any noises again, this is just a classic warning at this point that you may hear some excess noise. But I feel like it's also tradition to get some extra drinks in for the penultimate episode, because this was the Northwest episode last year where we got pretty tipsy and pretty testy on some arguments.
Oh yeah, we were mad at each other
because we had some heavier drinks that evening.
I need to go back and listen to that episode.
Yes.
That was a good one.
Maybe our most contentious episode. But regardless, Jamie, what are you drinking?
I am drinking something that we've probably had on the pod before.
We've definitely had.
It's a winter classic. The Isolation Ale from Odell Brewing Co., which I'm pretty sure they only put out in the winter. I think it's a seasonal. beverage.
It's seasonal.
Isolation, very topical.
It feels extremely topical this year. I don't know what kind of beer this is. I think it's brown in some way. But it doesn't specify, like, it's not an IPA, it's not a red. I don't know what it is, but it's good. And I like getting it every year in the winter. So
A brown in some way beer.
it's like darker, I think. I don't know.
This is Brian. I am drinking a Tallgrass Brewing Company oatmeal cream stout called Buffalo Sweat. It is about as appetizing as that sounds.
I disagree.
It's not that bad.
Can you explain what it tastes like? What does it taste like?
It's kind of sweet.
Yeah, it definitely has a sweeter edge, and I don't know that I want a ton of sweetness with my stouts necessarily, or at least not right now. For a time, I think I did, but recently that hasn't been hitting.
I bought those because I drank a lot of Buffalo Sweat in college, and I don't remember why. I feel like one of my friends really liked it or something.
I remember liking it in college.
I saw it at our liquor store, and I was like, it felt very nostalgic, so I bought it. And then Brian was like, it's fine.
And I said, it's just not the best.
Brian hates
there are
this beer.
better stouts. It doesn't mean I'm not gonna drink it. I like beer. I'm gonna drink a beer on Beer Time with Books. So yeah, it's decent. It's actually also a Midwestern brew from Wichita, Kansas. Which that's something I did not know actually. Tallgrass.
It's a local
brewing company. So repping some Midwest here. So that's what we're drinking. And now we have our recent media section, 1 or 2 highlights since the last episode, which encompassed a Thanksgiving break. So there was a lot of opportunity to get some media in. So I guess we'll go back around, same order. Recent media, Danny?
Yeah, a lot of content. I don't know. So much content this year. Will and I have finished The Crown. We finished British Baking Show.
There's your 2.
That's it. No more.
Absolutely not. The Crown, phenomenal as usual. I don't want to spoil anything, but
spoiling history? Are you kidding me? You're about to spoil some history right now?
Well, just like what the show covers, I guess. I listened to a I think I talked about this last time. I listened to a 5-part podcast about like Princess Diana before watching the season of The Crown, and I'm surprised at like what the season covered about Diana's life and didn't cover. Specifically, I think I just like recency bias made me expect more Diana content than we got. But turns out there were other things happening besides Princess Diana's trials and tribulations during this time.
Yeah, I thought she got a lot of coverage. So that's kind of interesting because we just finished it too. So just to hear that is an interesting perspective. But
I mean, she did, but I also this is what 5 episode 7 to 9 hours of content regarding Princess Diana, and so I don't know. There were some things I was surprised.
9 more hours of Diana.
I expected content. 10 full hours of Diana only. But loved The Crown as per usual over Thanksgiving break. I also read a tiny bit of the behind the scenes coffee table book of The Crown season 1. That is basically just everything that you would love to know about The Crown. And I don't know that they plan to do it for every season, but it was very interesting to just it's so dense, and it's just a history book related to The Crown, and talks about what it gets wrong and what it gets right, and what it doesn't cover. And so I enjoyed reading that, delving into that. I only get one more piece of media, I guess. I also recently, I just finished Kylie Reid's book, Such a Fun Age. It's kind of a popular contemporary novel right now. I think it came out this year or late last year. And it was a roller coaster of a book for me. It covers race and class and status and millennials. I don't know, generational. It's like all, there's so much covered. I was really impressed with everything that that the author was like able to address in this book. And like I went through like very intense periods of like really, really liking it and really, really not liking it, which like I don't feel happens very often. Like normally when I start a book, I'm like, I pretty much know where this is, like how I'm gonna feel about this book. But like even by the end, I was like kind of, I don't know, I was on the fence about how I felt. So I recommend it. I think it's an important read. So Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed.
Cool.
Nice. I started listening to a podcast recently called Dead Eyes that is on the HeadGum network, and I listen to a lot of HeadGum shows. And I had heard about this podcast like a while ago. This guy was a guest on a different podcast that I listened to and whatever. But then I didn't think about it. And then it was on a list from like the New York Times or NPR or something of the best podcasts of 2020. And I was like, okay, I remember hearing about this and it sounds ridiculous, so I'll start listening to it. And I've only listened to a few episodes, but the premise of this podcast, it's called Dead Eyes. It's this guy, Connor Ratliff, who is an actor. He's in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. He's the weird guy at the summer camp with Susie.
Oh yeah.
So he's an actor, and he made this podcast to explore something that happened when he was really young, like in his 20s. And essentially it is like Serial about something really stupid. Like it's set up like Serial, but about something really stupid. And the stupid thing is that when he was in his 20s, his very first acting gig that he ever got cast in was as a very small part in the show Band of Brothers. But then Tom Hanks saw his audition tape and told the casting director, I don't like that guy. He has dead eyes. And then he lost the job because Tom Hanks said that about him.
Damn. Nice guy, Tom Hanks.
Shit.
Ripping you a new one.
So the whole podcast is him like kind of investigating this. Like he's trying to get in contact with like the casting director who fired him and with like all these different people. He's trying to work up the courage to contact Tom Hanks and like re-audition for him. But he's also interviewing a bunch of his like other actor friends about their failures in the acting industry. So it's like a goofy, kind of serious, weird show. Like the second episode is him talking to John Hamm, who he starred in a play with at Mizzou, like before John Hamm was a real actor. So it's just it's all over the place. A real
actor.
I mean, before he was like famous.
Before Mad Men, he was not a real actor.
Before he was John Hamm.
You know what I mean. Anyways, it's very goofy. I've listened to like the first 3 episodes, and there's 14 episodes right now. There's not a lot, but I'm enjoying it. And I started reading a romance book called Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which is just for fun for me because I needed something light. And I like it so far. I don't have much else to say about it. But,
light in the book, light on the pod.
Yeah, that's what I need.
Good stuff. And for me, a couple shows for Thanksgiving break. Jamie and I just ripped through Queen's Gambit.
Also Queen's Gambit.
Just in like pretty much 2 days, I think.
Yeah, it was like 2 or 3 days. We watched all of Queen's Gambit.
Which it's been a while since we've had a 4-episode run, especially for episodes that are like longer than 30 minutes. But we did a 4-episode run on like that first night, I think, of the break, or maybe the second night. But I like that a lot, and I thought it was really well done for something that is just like, I feel like could be hard to translate, like chess on screen. Obviously there's so much more to it with substance abuse issues and different things like that, but I just thought it was very stylish, very hip. I thought the story was really well done, and I've been playing a little chess on Chess.com. I'm one of the statistics. I'll admit it. I'm one of the statistics on Chess.com.
Chess.com?
Chess.com.
What?
Chess.com. They have, I'm just going to say chess.com a bunch.
Chess.com.
Not
sounds like when you're like little and you like want to see something like kind of raunchy online, so you search like boobs.com or something,
Just
and
something
like
very basic until you get a hit. Yeah, chess.com.
just like, oh, I'm interested in pencils.com.
Yeah.
Like that's what I don't understand.
Queen on queen, chess.com. So anyway, chess.com helps teach you like some of those moves and like helps explain, because a lot of times they're just like in the show, they're like, yeah, the Sicilian. But they never say what it is officially. Like you can see it on the board, but they're like, yeah, the Sicilian defense. So I like have learned what the Sicilian defense is and different things like that. So yeah, that was a very good show. And I'm curious about how that book is. I know some people have said that the book is
I know.
pretty
I'm
good.
real interested in reading the book now.
Yeah.
Also, I thought it was based on a true story for the first 3 episodes.
I did briefly.
I looked up, I think after like the first episode, I was like, Queen's Gambit
it could
real?
be.
Question.
Queen's Gambit real?
I really wanted it to be based on a true story.
I did too.
Yeah. So that's been one thing. And then I brought this up before, but I just feel like we're in a new era of this. But we've been continuing on with Twins Peak at a more rapid pace recently. And Twins Peak was a really...
Twin Peaks.
Oh, sorry, Twins Peak. Twins Peak. It's one singular peak of the... So for Twin Peaks, and it was such a slow go for us for a while, but like very invested in that now because it's just been absolutely bonkers. And there's been something that Jamie and I have both heard independently from independent sources about like the second season having slumps and like the worst episode in the middle of people being like, it's still like a fantastic show, but obviously like these episodes are really bizarre. And I feel like we just hit a slump from what I could tell on IMDb. Weird choices getting made.
Yeah,
on the first scene of the episode in this slump, there were 2 songs playing simultaneously for like 5 minutes. And I couldn't figure out why.
With very different moods.
It was like at a funeral or a wake, I guess, and it was like a like jazzy tune that they do whenever they're like investigating clues, but also this really like sad music that they play when obviously there's like really melodramatic stuff going on. I was like, why? Why are they doing this? What's going on? Do I just not get Twin Peaks anymore?
Like one song would get louder sometimes.
And it was like depending on who the characters are, but regardless, I'm still fascinated. We both have agreed that like the worst episodes can probably be as like fascinating of a ride as like
it's a weird show.
A really well done episode. So anyway, those have been a couple that have been going on, and with that, a little bit of a longer beginning, but hey, it's episode 30, 2 beer night. This happened last time. We were committed to a long
I'm already done with my first beer.
We're getting 2 beers going. We're gonna fight about Jimmy. We're gonna
let's fight about. I'm ready to fight about anyone.
We're gonna fight about Jimmy Snowman. So yeah, with that, we're gonna transition on into our discussion on the second half of Danny's Choice, Oryx and Crake.
Great. Quick summary.
Danny's screen transitions on her face. Let me pull up my notes.
Hold on. I have a long list of notes for this. So I think we left off at Jimmy graduating high school. Around that time, Jimmy graduates high school. Crake goes to like this very famous like science institute, basically. And Jimmy goes to like a very like, you know, like a lesser known, not impressive college. And basically, like, we see Jimmy's life kind of devolve. He, you know, starts, like, working for things that he doesn't believe in. He's, like, in marketing, basically. Marketing things that he, you know, that he feels, like, morally ambiguous about. And despite, you know, being somebody, like, the irony, you know, is that, like, despite being somebody who, like, loves words and loves, like, claims to, like, love literature, he's, like, basically just, like, writing bullshit for, you know, like different like products. Meanwhile, like Crake is succeeding at this like world famous like institution, and like we see their paths cross. I think just a few chapters in, like Crake comes to visit Jimmy, and they basically like fall back into their old like patterns, their old habits, and they play games together. Or maybe it's when Jimmy goes and visits Crake at some point. He, sees how beautiful everything is. He sees how fancy like this institution is. And he also continues to feel like everything is kind of morally ambiguous to him. Like, at Crake's, university, they're genetically modifying, everything pretty much. They're doing like very unethical like testing. And Jimmy like feels very out of place because not only is he like described, Crake describes him as like neurotypical, but he's not a genius, so he feels very like out of place, but also he seems to be the only person like in this institution with Crake that like is like questioning anything. And so he starts like, we see Jimmy's progression into like being very concerned about like what Crake is doing, but also like not really understanding how to deal with it. And at the same time, we see Snowman's flashbacks. Well, those are Snowman's flashbacks, but in his real, in his real time, he is trekking basically like back to the compound. And he like has some mishaps. He has to get away from some pigoons. And he basically like, talks us through what the aftermath of like whatever, we still don't know at this point, like, what kind of like plague and or like pandemic happened. To wipe everybody out.
Out the P word. Oh.
I'm gonna say pandemic.
Panoramic.
Some kind of parallelogram.
Just sum it out.
So yeah, we still don't know like what this, we don't know if it was like we really don't know. It's like a plague of some kind. We just are not sure. And so Snowman finally makes it back, and like the stories cross basically at this point where he has he comes upon the bodies of Oryx and Crake outside the compound, and his flashback intersects with this moment into like he is the one, we find out he is the one who kills Crake, and Crake is the one who kills Oryx, he eventually like makes his way back to the Crakers in like in the regular timeline. He makes his way back to the Crakers, and it ends with basically like the Crakers telling him that like, hey, while you were gone, some people like you, like we interacted with some people like you, and he was like, I don't understand, he tries to make a decision about whether or not he's going to interact with these humans, these non-Crakers. But the book ends before we find out. And obviously, like we talked about last episode, this book is the first of a trilogy, which, makes sense. It sort of ends on a cliffhanger. But that brings me to like my first question to both of you. Like, how do you feel about like this book sort of ending on this cliffhanger versus like Rabbit Run, for instance, which is the first in a series that like acts as like a standalone book. I didn't really mean to choose two books that were part of a series, but I felt like they were both really different. So I wondered what your impressions of this one was.
Yeah, I was pretty disappointed with the ending. I'll be honest. I got to the ending, and then this whole book felt like a prologue of like, oh, okay, so like this is the real thing that's happening, is he's gonna meet these people, and we don't see any of that, which I think is disappointing. Do I have anything else to say about that? I don't know. I agree that Rabbit Run like stands on its own more as a novel and a full story. I think that the flashbacks in this are a nice story in and of themselves, and I was much more interested in those than I was in like Jimmy's musings while he's walking through the desolate land. But yeah, I don't know. I expected something more to happen at the end than what happened. Where we're just kind of like, he's about to go talk to these people or do whatever.
Yeah, and then it just ends. We don't even know if he decides to go and talk to them.
Yeah, it just sort of stops, which I didn't love. I was kind of like, oh, it's over. Okay.
Yeah, it was a weird ending. It as far as like even a cliffhanger, I felt like it could have gotten to like more of a point that led into like the next action to be taken, because as you said, Danny, we don't even know necessarily, you know, what his decision is going to be. Like the last sentences, or I guess the last two, 0 hour, Snowman thinks time to go after looking at his watch. And we don't really know if that means like going to talk to them. And you know, that's fine. It is, you know, a strategy for the cliffhanger, and it, you know, does allow us to wonder what's going to happen. But I feel like there are more powerful ways to like lead into, you know, whatever thing comes next that draws you to want to figure that out. Because at the very least, like, while this does flow in and does have that prologue-y feeling to it, it still does like encompass an entire story of like Oryx and Crake from, you know, his relationships with them until their death. And like, that's fine. But yeah, it just kind of was a weird point to get to that. I think it was like 40 pages before the end there. And that's when we start getting Jimmy Snowman coming back and getting into this next section. And for how much time there was to build all of this story, I feel like the development of these extra people could have happened before, like that wisp of smoke that he saw in the air. Like, I feel like that would have been something that would have made it feel more like, oh, well, we got to get to the bottom of that for book 2. But as it stands, it kind of like falls into this feeling of like, I had a really good idea and good world building for the most part. Like, it was an interesting world to kind of like see how she put it together, but like that there was this tacked on thing. Like, okay, we explained all of that. We explained the parallelogram pandemic and and now there's these other people. Like, that was kind of a interesting choice to me. But I think it is still interesting, and there's still much to learn, you know, as the Mad Adam trilogy, and we're, you know, learning who those people are toward the end here. Like, that could be interesting to see how that group develops. But yeah, the ending was just a little weird from that standpoint. But yeah, definitely different from Rabbit Run, where like it could have just been like its own book for sure. Like, I don't think that there were a lot of instances where like I'd feel upset if I never read the other ones, because like that whole story is just like, that is what it is, and there's no cliffhanger there.
I don't know if either of you did this. I looked at this, like, not the synopsis, or kind of, I don't know, whatever, the quick breakdown of the sequel, like a quick summary on Goodreads or whatever. And it looks like the sequel doesn't involve Jimmy at all. Like, I think it's just the background story of the people he's about to meet. And then the third book is when they come together, which
honestly, I got that vibe, though, that, like, Jimmy's story could almost be done. But that's, like, I didn't know that. But, like, I got that vibe a little bit as the story was going on of, like, does Jimmy even matter now? Like,
yeah.
Because, the Crakers are off starting to feel things for the first time.
The Crakers are, like, praying to a god at this point.
Yeah.
That is, I mean,
Jimmy.
as far as we know, and it's Jimmy.
Jimmy's gonna be the trifecta here of Oryx, Crake, and Snowman. That's gonna be a nice symbol for their religion. The triangle, easy to craft, like
a Father, Son, Holy Spirit kind of situation.
Yeah. New Christianity, whatever that be.
This is just a metaphor for Christianity.
Yeah, this is the Adam and Eve story. Mad Adam and Eve.
I think like the ending is what made it feel the most YA of all of it. Like, I remember like reading these kinds of books in like even like elementary school where I was just like I mean I guess I'm referring to like The Giver, but it reminds me of The Giver sort of in that way. But you know, where you like it almost is like it's setting you up to read like 10 books in a series or something, kind of like an Artemis Fowl situation.
Yeah.
Where like you know, by the time you've gotten to like the 8th book, you like don't even remember, like the first book doesn't even matter anymore. It's just like world building. So I felt a little cheated by the end because I did really feel like this book was like building, like just like world building, sort of like setting the stage. And I don't love that. Like I think, Jamie, I think you mentioned earlier something that I wish this book like maybe would have been, which is that the story of just like Jimmy's flashback. I think that the flashback could have just been its own story. I'm really like not as interested in you know, like the Jimmy isn't really doing anything that interesting. And I don't know. I think that it would have been much more interesting to go back and like go into detail about like there were so many things I had questions about. Like them playing like Extinctathon ends up like sort of becoming an actual like it sort of like melds into like real life at some point. And like Crake sort of like starts taking that game they used to play like as gospel. I don't know. I just think that there were so many things, and maybe they go into that detail like later, so many things about like Crake's parents and Jimmy's parents and, you know, so much the pleblands. Like I was so interested in what the hell was going on out there. Like, I don't know. I felt like there was a lot more detail that like in this world already could have been explored.
Yeah, I almost feel like I would have been more engaged if it had been just like a linear story told in that way, because whenever it got to a chapter that was mostly just Snowman and the Crakers, I was kind of like, all right, yeah, okay, your foot is hurting, whatever. I don't care.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I like, and also, I mean, even Jimmy Snowman Man, I was so frustrated with him, like 2/3, 3/4 through the book, when he finds that radio and hears people talking, and then he leaves it somewhere, and he's like, nah, oh well, like he doesn't even care.
I have two. Okay, I have something related to that. I have a question about that. I have two things that I think were like, what is that thing? The gun where you have to refer back. You have to wrap up the story of something
Chekhov's
if you bring
gun.
it in. Yes, like. So the radio is one of them because Jimmy finds a radio. He hears somebody speaking Russian. Like, he's the only human left within, like, millions of miles, apparently. And he hears another human, and then he escapes he gets drunk, falls asleep, escapes the next day, and then realizes as he's escaping that he forgets the walkie-talkie. And then it's just, like, never talked about again.
Yeah, it's just, like, and it's, like, one line, too, where he's like, shit, forgot the radio. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's
not a way to wrap this up.
He was in danger.
Oh, he could have
He was
gone
a little
back.
stressed out.
A couple of pigs. Sorry.
Piggoons, Jamie.
The radio.
Piggoons.
The radio also, like, I don't know. I just feel like it was like planted there, and then it was just like, oh my God, are there other people? Like, what's happening? Is he maybe not the only person left in the whole world? Like, what is going on? We don't know.
It should have been a much bigger deal to him than it was.
Yeah.
It was a literal, like, even if he had like risked his life to go back to get the radio, I feel like that would have been an important few pages. But he just leaves it. Second thing I have a question about. At the end of his basically after he like shoots Crake, Oryx is dead. Most people are dead, I think, at this point. He's inside the compound. He like writes a note explaining everything that happened, and then he just like crumples it up and throws it on the ground. And like, I know it was probably supposed to be symbolic, but like, what is the point? Like, he basically just like explains everything. But it's almost like simultaneously he's like hoping there are people out there, but also like, understanding that there probably aren't. I don't know. Did you guys make anything of that? I felt a similar way. I was kind of just like, why? This feels important. Like, maybe you should be able to document what's happening. I don't know. I know Jimmy didn't ask for this job, but I feel like he's being wildly irresponsible.
I don't think that Jimmy cares about anything. Like, I don't know. It's like he's acting like he cares about the Crakers or about whatever. Like, Crake tells him right before he kills Oryx of, like, don't let us down or something, but that doesn't mean anything, and I also don't know what his purpose is. Like,
well, the Crakers weren't well developed either, like, in the past story. Like, I know that Crake had said, you know, what their reason for development was, as far as, like, you know, they're getting rid of all the bad parts of humanity, but that seems to be, like, the brainchild of Crake, and the importance is with Crake. So why is it so important to carry this on if it was just, like, the musings of this guy
who's a madman?
Yeah, who's literally
like
set off like a massacre of the entire world.
Creates a genocide.
That's another thing that like was not explained, is that like Crake goes from like sort of just like being a very smart person at like his university, and then like a few years later when he takes Jimmy out, like basically gets him a job at Rejuvenescence or Renew You or whatever the hell it's called. Like he gets Jimmy a job, and then
Renew You, whatever the hell it's called.
I agree. I don't care about all the names.
No, the names were distracting and bad and dumb. I thought they were dumb.
Yeah, I agree that they're dumb.
But like he gets Jimmy a job, and then like all of a sudden, like a few years later or a few months later, Crake is just like a mastermind who wipes out the fucking entire world. Like Jimmy says something that is so funny. He says something like he starts to realize like just how important Crake must be, and I'm like, is he the ruler of the universe? Like he seems like he has so much power. And I one thing that really bothered me throughout the entire book is that like we're not put into any context. Like the world is not put into context in any way. We don't understand like other countries. We don't know like barely even other cities. Like we don't know what's going on. So like I don't know. This is not a podcast episode where I just rant about everything, but I'm just.
It could be, but I think that's where like the Pleebland, also going back to like the underdevelopment of that too, becomes such a problem, because then like when they do actually go out there for the first time, like it's been this whole thing. Mm-hmm. Like we have all these guards and like it's such a big deal. Like we got to separate it out, and then you go out to this thing that's essentially like
New York City,
Times Square.
That's it.
Like
it's just
and everybody's
it's just present day New York City,
and everybody's just doing stuff. Like it's not like, I know that there are these, you know, glimpses into like things that are off in a dystopian way. Obviously, like they have to take some medicine to be able to like protect themselves, but like you'd think there'd be such a greater degradation of society overall that like it just kind of threw off the whole balance of like why all of this is going on, why the compounds even came to be, why like Crake's importance is important to this world. Like it just didn't make sense when we got to a reveal of the other side of it. Like it was such a weird thing to see that, and it was just like it wasn't that big of a deal. Like I know the disease was a big deal, but like it wasn't that big of a deal as far as society goes.
I like, as a preface, I respect Margaret Atwood as an author, but I
do too.
It feels like someone's first attempt at dystopia, where they're like kind of pretentious in college, and they're like, "Oh, the real dystopia was our world all along, like present day." I was like, "Oh, well, cool."
So also like we find out that like when that happens, when Crake takes Jimmy out, like he basically like vaccinates him against like the Pleeblands, and then is also just like, "Hey, this is like because we're gonna get sex workers, and we don't want you to get like diseases," and like. On the one hand, like, I don't know. You're right. Like, it wasn't the complete societal corruption that I was expecting. And also, like, there was really no tie between this like city that they visit and like what we experienced when we like learned about Oryx and her experience. Because that society seemed very different from this one. Like, I don't know. I thought that was weird. It seemed that like, the world that like, or the situation Oryx grew up in, like felt very, I don't know, much more sort of like fucked than this one did. And so this one just like felt kind of normal. But Jimmy has this realization where he's like, you know, nothing out here is as terrible as I was led to believe. And so like that is at least a moment of self-awareness where he maybe realizes that like maybe like, you know, the people who are being controlled are not the people on the outside, they're the people like on the inside. But still, like that whole idea is like kind of underdeveloped. Like we don't even really know still why, like how we don't know how the compounds like practically how they came to be. We know sort of the before and the after, but like the middle section of that like is not really explained.
Yeah, and even the fact that like the Pleeblands are all visible too, like the deception doesn't even make sense as far as like, you know, you could say the media did it, but like they actively can see these large swaths of society over the walls, depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
And it never really becomes that clear that like things are going crazy, like things are on fire, things are falling apart. Like they should be able to see all of that if it's as like vibrant as it was said to be in that Times Square-esque area. That's visible at night. Like it just doesn't make sense that anybody could have even been that fooled to that degree also. Like that was just a weird thing to balance out once that realization came, I suppose. And just to talk about Oryx for a second too, I thought that like Oryx as a character felt a little wasted, that like we didn't get more from her perspective, and like we didn't get development from her when she came around either. Like that was kind of a disappointing thing where it was like, well, what was she for? Like
she's still just like a sex kitten essentially.
Her mystery and build up didn't feel like it had that much of a payoff. And
I also felt like I had this like revelation like near the end that like, I mean, Oryx was like brought in to like sort of teach and nurture like the Crakers in the compound. But like Oryx herself is a Craker. Like Oryx is essentially like, I mean, she's a human, but like she
this just feels like a heady
I mean, so
Oryx
I was just
was
like
the Craker all along.
Aren't we all Crakers?
Aren't we all Crakers? The Craker was all of us.
But like Oryx thinks that Crake is a god essentially. Like she almost like worships his like mind. She like is pretty submissive. She like doesn't really like talk about having like that much of a past. And she doesn't seem to like feel things very strongly. And also, like, she has a very high sex drive when it comes to Jimmy. She reminds me of a Craker. So like part of the reason that like I feel like Crake is, I don't even know if he's attracted to her. I don't know what he is, because he's also like a chaotic character. But like, you know, he's presented as like sort of this just like sexless genius, like who like, you know, can't be bothered with like jokes or sex or like whatever else,
but can be
like,
bothered with genocide.
It's true. Like it's so insane to me. Like I feel like the danger of Crake didn't really like come through as much as it should have, because like, you know, Crake like talks about how like, oh, like they don't need jokes, they don't LOL. He like is very casual about so many things, and then like will just wipe out an entire civilization. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Like, I guess like, I don't know. I want to talk more about Oryx, but I feel like she was again like kind of underdeveloped, because like she sort of only existed in the context of Crake or Jimmy, and then like, you know, she didn't really have her own story. Jimmy also suspects at one point that like Oryx is humoring him when he's asking her about her past. So I don't know, like, why is it so significant that Jimmy is obsessed with the fact that Oryx is the girl that he saw like so many years ago? Like, why does that matter?
Yeah, also, I don't know. First of all, I don't know why it matters. I don't think it does. I think that his obsession with Oryx is creepy as fuck. I hated reading about it because every time he was like, "Oh, that little naked girl," when I was fucking 13.
The fact that that was the tie-in the entire time, like for a while they were still young and it was still a problem. Then it became a big problem because it never ended.
So
There was
gross.
no other connection apart from that.
Yeah, and it's just like, and they both, like, Jimmy and Crake keep this image of her when she's like a weird sex worker as a 8-year-old or whatever, and it's why do we keep bringing that up?
Crake even when he's in college specifically asks for a sex worker who looks like this picture of Oryx, and like he doesn't even specify an older version. Like he just says, I want somebody who looks like this. Like I don't know, Oryx seems extremely problematic, and I don't really understand like why. I don't understand why she's here. I don't understand why her name is in the title of this book. Like, because it seems to me that like the only reason is that like Jimmy, you know, continues to sort of like tell the Crakers that Oryx is a benevolent sort of like mothering, nurturing
she's
figure.
a goddess now. I think that's fine. That's a part that I still like about it as far as the development of them after the fact. Like I think Crake's development was fine as far as like he's a problematic person, but like his development as a character was fine overall. But I do like that part of it that they became the deities. That was something that I still said that I liked the first time and that I still like as a developmental piece of like an interesting angle in a book to have a religion being created real time. Like that's a really unique angle that I did like. So I'll just throw that.
I just wish that we'd had more. I mean, it's essentially what we already said, but like more of a breakdown about like why Jimmy is so obsessed with her, like Oryx specifically, and what her significance is in the storyline. Because like, sure, she comes in and teaches the Crakers.
How does she get in that position?
That's insane. What is her special characteristic that makes her like the best at that? Why does Crake pick her? Why, other than like he has a weird pedophilic attraction to her? Like I don't understand.
There are also so many opportunities for us to learn about Oryx's past, and she just like Oryx is shady as fuck. Like she won't talk about her past. She like maybe makes it up like when Jimmy asks about it, which like again like leads me to this weird, like I know that she existed before this, but it like almost feels like her lack of having any context in the world like makes me feel like she was just created like the Crakers were. Like I don't know, I don't really understand like why. I have a feeling like later in the series, like, you know, Jimmy might realize that like Crake had way more control and like way more to do with like all of the all of the things that happened in Jimmy's life, like way before Jimmy like suspected, you know, Crake's like involvement in like the development of society. Like I don't know, Crake seems very important, but he's dead now, and I don't really understand like what to do with that.
I honestly think that here's the thing. Maybe someday I'll read the other books. Probably not. But if it gets to a point in like the third book and there's this huge reveal that Oryx was in fact created by Crake just in the image of that little girl that they saw, that might be interesting. And that might explain why she's such a dull character.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that's anything that is actually happening.
Yeah. I don't know. I wanted so badly to like for the second half of this book to go somewhere like very significant, and I just like was kind of disappointed. That's not to say that I don't like Margaret Atwood's storytelling, because I think she's very important and I think she's a very important person. But I'm surprised at like when comparing it to Handmaid's Tale. I don't know, I'm surprised. Handmaid's Tale was obviously like a big deal for a reason. And Like, I don't agree with like the assessment that this book is majestic per the back cover of this book.
There are so many quotes on the back of our book that I'm just like, well,
but there are still things like just to have the other perspective of like stuff that I did it wasn't a total wash. There was just a lot of these things that like, because it built up in such a way, especially like you put a lot of risk when you do this convergence of timelines. Like it has to come to a really spectacular meeting point, and I think that like that's something that I think is still resonating with like me talking about it now, and potentially with you guys as well. But like just the fact that happened so much later in the story, and that like that part of it felt like somewhat of a miss, but like there was a lot of engaging stuff, and like I thought there was a lot of talent in the world building, maybe not necessarily with the naming conventions of what was going on. And this was actually an interesting thing that I saw that is unrelated to this, but like helped me realize what made it seem so off-putting as far as the names were concerned. There's a game that just came out, Cyberpunk 2077, and they have like instructions on different aspects of the game and like explanations of the legalese that's done in the cyberpunk way, and a lot of people were off put by that because it was like overdone, where cyberpunk like it's sprinkled in with like these words that are a little bit, you know, off and created in this universe itself and all this slang and whatnot, but like everyone was complaining that it was so heavy-handed. And it felt like that was kind of the case in this book, where everything was so heavy-handed and kind of like in your face of like, get it? It's a combination of these things, or get it? It's a new you. But like regardless, aside from the naming conventions, the world itself was still very interesting of like how it functioned, how like all of these different corporations came together, and like, you know, all of the espionage and like how everybody is using this technology in really malicious ways. Like that all was still interesting. So it's not to say that like the whole book was a total wash. And the other thing that I want to bring up as well is that a lot of times in like YA in particular, this is like a trope that's been called out on Twitter a lot, is like the classic like, she was beautiful but didn't know it, and like all these different like characteristics of the main protagonist, where it's like they have these flaws that are like wink wink flaws, but they're like pretty flawless heroic characters. I did like that side of it where Jimmy wasn't that. I think that like was kind of an interesting angle that like we didn't get to the end, and Jimmy just like all of a sudden was very altruistic, and we're like, cool, Jimmy, like it's worth following along with. I thought that was an interesting angle as well, even though I don't necessarily think I'm all that sold on Jimmy. I'd like that to get explored more in dystopian novels, where we don't necessarily have to have like this YA dystopia of like the Katniss Everdeen of like, again, those similar tropes. I think that's been stale for a long time for me, and what keeps me from reading YA, and that was kind of a fresh take here. So I at least wanted to throw those out in the midst of all of these other like sides of it, that those things still did stand out to me, but the reason I'm feeling so visceral about it now is because of the way it came together near the end, that I felt like that was a miss. So I just wanted to throw those out there.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you for the most part.
I think I just
don't sound so dejected about
I know. I'm trying to think of everything you just said, and I don't know. I enjoyed reading the book. Like, it was a quick read, and it felt like YA. I think that I understand that like Jimmy is maybe kind of a unique character to be the narrator for this type of novel, but I still feel like he's a voice that I've heard over and over again in like, maybe not in a YA context, but like,
sure, yeah,
he's just like an unremarkable man. And I just am not that, I'm not invested in him.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying in the context of the story. I'm not saying, that's why I'm saying I'm not sold on Jimmy himself, but like, I'm sold on like the characteristics of a protagonist not needing to be this against all odds hero. But
Yeah.
I agree with that though, for sure.
Yeah, like
We
he's
also-
just not a new. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like, you said this at the beginning of the episode. Like, Jimmy doesn't care about anything. Like, I think I was really disappointed with. I think part of the reason that I feel so strongly about this is because I had really high hopes for this book, and like, I want to revisit just for a second, like what we talked about in the last episode, which is that like I wonder if either of you, like, if your feelings have changed. When we addressed very briefly like whether or not, you know, this book coming out in like 2003 versus 2020, like I feel a little bit desensitized a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
There were things that happened in this book where I feel like, yes, if I were reading this like as like my age in 2003, I would be like, that's horrifying. But like most of this is happening like currently, and so I feel a little bit like
All the way down
like
to the parallelograms.
all the way down to like literally we are in the middle of what ended the world in this book. And so I don't know, I am like maybe I just feel a little jaded, but I just kind of feel like I don't know that the shock value is as effective 17 years later. Like, I feel a little bit like, wow, like, you know what? Like, this is already kind of happening. We already have, like, corporations that have campuses. Like, they might as well be called compounds. Like, I don't know. I don't think that means it was ineffective. But I was continuing to, like, wish for more specifics. Like, I feel like in 2003, like, yes, just being like, oh, this corporation lied about its products, like, was bad. And, like, now I'm just like, no, that happens all the time, constantly. And so,
we
like,
expect that.
like, actually, I know that most corporations are lying about their products. And so I feel kind of like I wanted a lot more detail. Like, I wanted a lot more, like, okay, like, what exactly is making this world so bad? What is making what are the compounds really out to do? Like, what is Crake's motivation? And maybe it'll be answered later. Like, I'd like to finish the trilogy. I am interested in like reading the rest of the books. So I'll report back. But I'm invested in the story, but I think part of the reason that I feel I just feel bummed because I had higher hopes for it, I think.
Yeah, there was a specific part when it was talking about like, you know, Crake's master plan and everybody getting sick really suddenly and like the actual, you know, panoramic happening. It mentioned specifically like entire cities went on quarantine, and I was like,
yes,
that's a Tuesday.
Cool, dude.
Yeah, no, we
Wow.
already do
Wow,
that.
crazy, man.
Like, oh, Margaret Atwood, do you think that that's impressive?
A whole country went on lockdown. Ooh. Yeah, that is a very unfortunate thing about reading it right now, for sure. Like,
It's just such a weird perspective to have. I don't know.
but I am glad to read it now for that. Like, it was interesting to like be immersed in that to some degree, because obviously it's like not 100% the same, but like to have some feeling of what that would feel like was interesting. But yeah, I think that context for sure like aids with it, that like maybe if we did get to the climax of it, that it would like maybe be more like, oh my god,
Yeah.
that's pretty nuts.
I think it would feel way different if I weren't reading it in the middle
That's
of a pandemic.
Pretty nuts.
Pretty nuts.
We're
dude.
just like, yeah, no, this constantly happens all the time.
This is very normal. Yeah. Which, like, maybe that means she's a genius and she predicted the future. I respect Margaret Atwood. I can't underline enough how much I respect Margaret.
Maybe it means I'm a genius because I chose this book 9 months ago, and
Maybe.
here we are.
Oh boy, you did this.
I want to get into, I mean, we kind of already did, but I want to get into final thoughts. Like, give me a summary. How are you feeling?
Give me a summary.
Here's a summary of the entire book.
How are you feeling?
A summary of how you're feeling.
Yeah, let's trade summaries to make sure Danny got hers right. This is the last check for the season.
Summary of how I'm feeling. I don't know. I will say that I read the second half of this book mostly in like 2 days. Like, I got through it really quickly because I was invested in what was happening. Like, and genuinely, when Crake slit Oryx's throat, I like audibly gasped.
Yeah, that was surprising.
I was
for
like,
sure.
oh shit, like, what's going on? I think that it's an interesting story, and I probably would have really, really loved it if I had read it 8 years ago. I don't
specifically.
I just
2012 hit different, you know.
I really feel like if I were it feels like YA to me. I feel like if I had read it when I was a teenager, I would have liked it so much better. But I think that there's a lot missing from the character development. I would maybe read the second book, but also I was really turned off reading the synopsis when it was suddenly like, oh no, Jimmy's not here. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe it gets into them meeting Jimmy, but it sounds like it's just the background of the people on the beach.
He'd have to be involved. Like, it ending like it does, there'd be no way that Jimmy is not involved, especially because the Crakers are such a significant buildup that they would say something about him also.
The synopsis did not indicate that. It genuinely sounded like it was like background information about these people on the beach, and then the third book was when they met. Like, it felt like it skipped a book, this storyline. And maybe I'm wrong, because I just read it very briefly, but maybe I would read them on an airplane.
Whenever that happens.
A specific vibe.
Yeah, that's a very strategic
If I'm ever on an airplane again.
Prerequisite to being able to read this book.
In the middle of our parallelogram. Yeah, I don't know. That's how I feel. I'll say that it's not in my top 3 books.
Hey,
for next episode.
save it for the pod.
It's not in the top 3.
For next,
This is the pod, friend.
For next pod.
Is that enough of a final thought?
Yeah.
Cool. That was a great thought.
I think just echoing the early sentiments, there was a lot that hooked me on this book that, you know, just kept it flowing along despite some of these other setbacks throughout the story, like with the naming conventions and these underdeveloped moments. I thought the world building was fairly interesting, especially, you know, considering when it was written. Like, that's fairly early within the internet age. Like, think of some of the websites you were on in 2003. Didn't look like they did.
I was not on the internet.
Okay, I was on a little earlier than I should to some of these sites.
Grade.
Yeah, I was on. I had social media in elementary school.
Wow.
Yeah,
I
early
might
social
have
media.
been on Neopets. Maybe.
Did you have a Zanga?
Oh, I had a Zanga for sure.
But did you have a Zanga at age 9?
I had a Zanga too early. I'll just say that. So anyway, if you think of the websites that were around there, like, it is pretty miraculous that this feels so relatable to us in 2020. Like, that's a pretty miraculous thing, that the writing is so accurate to that degree that, like, all of the, you know, different paths that the future of the internet could have gone into from that point in time, like, this is a pretty, you know, remarkable thing that it ended here. And it's like, yep, that's pretty spot on. Unfortunately, pandemic, spot on, like, all of that, it's pretty spot on and pretty nuts. But unfortunately, it was just marred by these various instances of, like, why did all of this build up for certain characters, like with Oryx? Why did all of this build up to this point in time with Jimmy? You know, that just kind of set it back a little bit, and it's just hard to judge it too much when it is part of a series could be answered book 2, book 3, but
Do you think that Atwood does Orwell better?
I don't
Okay.
at this
I just
particular
wanted to clarify.
at this particular moment for Oryx and Crake. But it's just hard to judge it to that degree because with a lot of other series that are in the YA genre, despite having this larger narrative, like one of my favorites from when I was a kid was the Hidden Children series.
The Shadow Children.
Or the Shadow
series.
Children. So there were like seven.
Oh, fuck.
Seven.
That series slaps.
It slaps so hard. I want to reread that series.
I have read.
Let's read it now.
I've read multiple of those books.
Next season is
Shit.
just Shadow.
That series
So,
slaps.
man, I just brought up some freaking.
Such a Margaret Haddix. If you're listening,
but here's the broader point with that is that like that was a longer series that had this big arc, but each of those stories felt like they were able to tell what they needed to tell within each of those books, and that was a longer story to tell that wrapped up in such a great way that incorporated everything you'd learned up to that point. So the fact that like we're not necessarily hitting that here, it does feel like a miss a little bit.
those books were so good.
Yeah, so like just in comparison to other series of that nature, and those were pretty like for YA, those were getting into some pretty heavy subject matter as well. So, there is some precedence for it. Same time period even to some degree, and thinking about when those books were released and everything. So I don't know. I think that's just kind of what I was thinking of once I got to the end of this of like, okay, like I can give it some leeway because it's in a series, but also like I know other series that have been able to do this in a more graceful way, I suppose. So I'm not going to write it off because like could redeem itself, but like, it is a series, but I can't necessarily give it all of the points back because of that either. But overall, enjoyable read. Overall, impressive that the vision of the future was pretty freaking accurate.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. Like, now that you say that, it is very impressive that I wasn't like that impressed by her assessment of this book, like of the world in 2003. Like, it's very impressive. Like, what she was like sort of able to see happening. I don't think necessarily that like it's a requirement for every single book in a series to stand alone as its own story, but I don't think cliffhangers are super necessary, especially if you're not going for like a YA kind of book, which like I don't think this is classified as YA. Like I
don't think so.
It's not. So like
there's no way. There's too much like real explicit.
Well, I don't know. Like,
on.
I mean, I think the Shadow Children, like that's like maybe what I was thinking about when I was like reading this book. Like that's, those are the kind, like I loved reading those kinds of books when I was younger. And, I feel like I almost wish like this series were split up into like 10 smaller books because, I wanted more detail. Like I can appreciate like her foresight almost, but some of it fell flat, and I wanted more detail pretty much the entire time. I had so many questions. I appreciated like Jimmy's character development, but I still had a lot of questions about his past, and I don't think that like any of the other characters, really got the same sort of attention that he did like remotely at all. I do want to read the rest. I requested the second book from the library as we were recording this podcast.
On the job, dude.
and also, like you said, like it's a fast read. It's like, I want to like know what happens in the story. Like I'm very curious, like what happens in the rest of this world. After reading the synopsis of the second book, like I have a suspicion that Jimmy doesn't matter, as much as we think that he does. But I don't know. I'm a little disappointed, but, reading Margaret Atwood is never, like, a bad thing. Like, I didn't waste my time. This book, like, definitely kept my attention. And I'm interested to, like, see, like, how the rest of the world, like, plays out. I want to know what happens. I want to know how the world, like, makes it out of, the parallelogram. If it does. Because we're also
for the
sitting
hope of
here,
all
like,
of us. Please.
We're desperately hoping that like some world somewhere can make it out of the pandemic. So yeah, I don't know. It's a solid 3 stars for me, but but I mean, I
agree that it's a solid 3 stars.
Yeah, and I think just as a brief point, because we brought it up last time, I think it suffered from the story being split in 2 that we kind of mentioned, that like the development at the halfway point was like underdeveloped at that point because it was split in 2, that might have been a mistake. So as you had mentioned, like splitting it into 10 shorter stories or whatever, giving each storyline its due, I think, just to echo that I agree with that could have made a stronger overall presentation for sure.
Someone who I really, really respect, who I'm friends with on Goodreads, rated this 5 stars, and
God damn.
I'm questioning a lot of
You know, Goodreads.
Add them to the back of this book. Brilliant, provocative, sumptuous, and downright terrifying. A book too marvelous to miss.
Wow.
Majestic. Keeps us on the edge
of our seats. Yeah, I don't know. Goodreads is a trip, man. When people rate stuff on Goodreads and you're just like...
Goodreads is a trip, man.
I'm constantly confounded by your ratings, Danny.
Why? Why?
You gave The Master and Margarita 4 stars. What the
Hey, we'll get into it next... We'll get into it next episode.
Is that too low? That's for you?
Low.
We'll get into it next episode.
All right. Anyway.
All right. That's all. Great job, guys. I am not scatting us out tonight because I'm pretty sure I did it last time.
So with that, I did forget to bring this up at the beginning. So if you're still here, good job. You get a jump on the rules. We are doing a book giveaway.
Please still be here.
You made it through all of that.
Now this is the end of the book discussions for season 2. That's 7 books, 2 episodes each, 14 eps. We're about to hit 15 for the next one. But we're going to have a giveaway where you have 2 ways to enter. It's going to be on YouTube, Brian's Book Bastion, and Instagram, Beer Time with Books. At the beginning of next episode, we will say the rules, but you'll be able to comment the answer to whatever it is that we ask. You can enter on Instagram or YouTube. You can only win once, but you can enter twice. And you'll have a chance to win one of the 7 books that we read in season 2. So review that list. I think we had a pretty decent season. A pretty
big variety.
For something that started into a lot of Southern Gothic and whatnot, we spread a little bit. So it should be interesting to see who wins and what they choose.
Yeah.
But great job, guys. Episode 30, 2 years old. Season 2 almost rolling out of here. We're almost done with our quarantine season. Who would have frickin' thought?
We're doing great, guys.
I was looking for it. Not me.
Not me.
Who would have thought?
So with that, we'll be back very soon because we don't have a book to read. It should be easy for us to just hop on the mic and get this going. But until then, who's scatting us out? I think Jamie and I did it the last 2 episodes. So Danny.
It is not me. I definitely did it last episode.
I think it's Jamie.
It's fine. I can do it. Okay, Brian always makes fun of me for doing the same scat.
She says this every time.
I'm going to be unique. Ru-do-do-do-do. A scoo-doo bop bleep. Whoop.
Andy Bernard's scat.
Andy Bernard.
We will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.